Every day we see more tents under bridges, more families living out of cars. And while the problems seem insurmountable, the solutions are simpler than you think. We share the real stories and the real solutions of homelessness, what works, what doesn't, and how communities like ours can do better. I'm Baron King, and this is Give Me Shelter. All right, so you're walking down a sidewalk and you see a homeless person sleeping on a park bench. Or you're walking down the street and you realize a panhandler's up ahead. And what are your thoughts? Are they dangerous? Is this person in danger? Is this person made bad choices? Are they lazy? Has this person been dealt a really bad hand? This person may not have been able to finish basic schooling. And what are our experiences? I've had things stolen out of my backyard. I've served people like this in a local soup kitchen. I'm often stopped by people asking me for money. I've had family members experience homelessness. And what are our feelings? I'm scared. I'm sad. Maybe I wish I knew what to do. What we want to do today is talk about how we think about homelessness, how we feel about homelessness, because the way we think, feel, and understand homelessness shapes our ability to think about strategies that will end homelessness. In a sense, our knowledge base and our experiences, our biases, they all play a role in how we think about things. And if we want the best outcome, we need to think the best way about it. And so, in a sense, when we don't think accurately about a problem, it forces us into a situation where we have limited choices to think about solutions. And so what I'd like to talk about is kind of an understanding of the factors that come into play when we think about a problem, and make suggestions on how we can get past that. What I would love is for everybody in this country to get on the same page and be able to consider what are some strategic, progressive solutions to homelessness. When I took this job 4 years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's a dangerous place to be. And over the years, I've learned quite a lot about homelessness, its causes, what the solutions are. But 4 years ago, my understanding of homelessness was, I'll be honest, severely limited. And my lack of understanding made me ineffective in coming up with solutions. But over time, I've been able to grow quite a lot in that area. And I feel like now I'm at a place where, even though I'm still learning, I'm able to think about this well. And I invite you into that place too. I'm going to give you an example. 4 years ago, I adopted a Belgian Malinois. This is a very athletic dog, very smart dog. And when I took it to the vet, I decided to get it microchipped, just in case the dog ran off and somebody found him, that they could locate the chip, get my information, and I could get the dog back. It made sense at the time. But here's what I didn't know about Belgian Malinois. They don't leave your side. They don't let you get out of their sight. It's ridiculous to chip a Belgian Malinois because you'll never lose them. They are like Velcro. And so that's an example of, now that I know what I know now, I would never have made that decision to get that dog chipped. Lesson learned. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about some of the things that get in the way of us thinking as well as we could. One area is a topic or a concept called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is when I experience something in a limited amount, and then I assume that it applies to all situations. So when I use a small amount of data to understand a problem and assign it to all people in a group. So for example, if I meet a homeless person and within a couple minutes by talking with them, I realize they're probably dealing with schizophrenia, I may start to assume that all homeless people, or at least the majority of them, are schizophrenic. That is going to cause me to have some struggles in coming up with effective solutions for this. So I speak a lot on this topic of homelessness, and what I get a lot of comments from people that say, are people homeless because they're lazy? Are people homeless due to mental illness? Are people homeless? Is the main cause of homeless addiction? And those are reasonable questions. I don't have a problem with the questions. But here's the thing. Statistics on homelessness are available, and about 1/3 of the homeless population has a substance use disorder. That's based on numbers from SAMHSA. But in the general population, about 17% of Americans have a substance use disorder. So the difference between 1/3 and 17%, it's not a huge difference. And so while substance use is a concern and a factor that we have to consider when we're looking at solutions for homelessness, it's not statistically significant as far as a driving factor would concern. As far as mental illness, the state of Tennessee, and I think this mirrors most of the nation, estimates that 20 to 25% of those that are experiencing homelessness have some form of mental illness. Okay, so what is the general population? 22%, and that's based on NAMI, so the National Institute for Mental Illness. So you really can't say that mental illness is driving that either. And so the question is, are these people homeless because of these factors, or are these factors happening because they're homeless, right? It's kind of like a chicken in the egg kind of problem. So let's talk about mental illness real quick. Depression and anxiety are significant mental illness factors in the United States. In the previous nonprofit I worked with, we worked with men and women coming out of the prison, and our job was to prepare them for life outside of the prison walls. And so when somebody would come to prison into one of our residential programs, we would get their mental health records and their physical health records from the prison, and about 95% of them would show a diagnosis of depression or anxiety. So the question was, well, should we just keep them on their medication because they had this diagnosis? And what I would say to you is it's really important to understand the environment when trying to assess mental illness, because I would propose to you that if you were incarcerated for a couple years, depression and anxiety are probably reasonable mental responses or psychological responses to being incarcerated. I would not be a happy person, and I'd be scared. And so showing signs and symptoms of depression or anxiety in an environment like prison makes sense, right? And so what we found at our treatment facilities is once somebody started to experience the joys of freedom living outside the prison walls, a lot of their symptoms dissipated. And I think that applies to homelessness. If I'm living in a tent or a tarp and I haven't been sheltered in a number of months or maybe a number of years, it's very likely going to take a toll on my mental health. I'm going to be depressed. I'm going to be despondent. I'm going to be sad. I may be suicidal. Anxiety is another big thing. We work with hundreds of people a day that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and assault and violence among the unsheltered happens on a daily basis. We see a lot of people that really have trouble sleeping at night because they've had experiences being assaulted. And so when we talk about mental illness and homelessness, it's important to think, well, they may not be homeless because they have a mental illness. They may have that mental illness in response to their current situations. Let's talk a little bit about substance use. I've been a therapist for about 20 years. A good number of my clients will tell me that after work, they've had a rough week, they want to relax, they have a glass of wine. Socially, in America, that's pretty acceptable. That's not a big deal. People living on the street, a glass of wine might not cut it. And so we do see a number of people that are unsheltered that are resulting to self-medication, right? They can't afford prescriptions. They can't afford an antidepressant, anti-anxiety. So they use something that they can find on the street to cut those symptoms. I share this because, again, it's difficult to think accurately about the reality of homelessness if we haven't experienced it ourselves. And so what I'm just hoping to say is I wouldn't look at mental illness and substance use as a necessary driver of homelessness, but it is an aspect of being homeless. And I think that's an important decision. Okay, So that was confirmation bias. We're going to talk about another type of bias called attribution bias. Now, this is looking at another person's behavior and assuming it represents character defects or immutable personal characteristics that aren't influenced by the environment. Okay. In a sense, if you're kind of a psychology nerd like me, in psychodynamic terms, it's the tension between the ego and the superego. It's the way we try and make ourselves feel better about ourselves when we know we're doing something that isn't right. Okay, here's an example. Sometimes I drive the speed limit. Sometimes I creep 5 or 10 miles up over the speed limit. I know it's against the law. I still do it. And what I tend to do is tell myself, you know what, you're in a hurry. You got a lot of stuff to do today. There's no one on the road. There's all sorts of excuses I can use, but I tend to find ways to rationalize my behavior that makes sense. However, if I'm driving on the road and I see somebody fly by me, blow my doors off, unfortunately, my first thought is, gosh, what a jerk. Isn't he thinking about anybody else? And so attribution bias is a way that we look at our own behaviors and we kind of give ourselves a pass, and then we look at behaviors of somebody else and we think, boy, that's a huge character flaw. So when we see a homeless person on the bench, what are we thinking? Why don't they get a job? Man, if they just got up, got a job, and earned a wage, improved themselves, then they wouldn't be homeless. When I took this job 4 years ago, one of the things I was stunned by was how many people would come into our community center or be on the steps of our facility in the broad daylight and just sleeping for hours at a time. I'll be honest, sometimes I thought it was laziness. Sometimes I thought they're maybe nodding off on opioids or had a lot to drink and just needed to sleep it off. Here's what I found. The majority of people that come into our facility during the day to lay down on the floor and go to sleep do so because they've been up all night trying to get a good night's sleep with one eye open, trying to protect themselves from assault. That changes the way I look at some of these behaviors. So when our biases creep in and we start to look at character flaws or behaviors as the cause of homelessness, it shifts our understanding of the causes of homelessness from systemic problems, such as housing, to individual problems. And so it's very difficult to build a comprehensive homelessness intervention strategy against random individual character and behaviors. It's much easier if we look at systemic causes and processes. So what is the housing market like? Are there enough affordable units? Are the affordable units in the right size to accommodate either families or single individuals? Okay, so we've talked about a couple things that skew our understanding of homelessness. And also knowledge is a big thing. If we haven't lived that life, if we hadn't had that experience, we're just going to have an experiential knowledge gap. And there's things that we can do to fill that gap, but we can't assume that we know everything, right? Making a decision with limited information causes that decision to be flawed at times. And so what's the danger of limited knowledge and experience? So according to Romeo Vitelli, who's a Canadian psychologist, most Americans think that homeless individuals are dirty, unhygienic, socially deviant, potentially violent, or sexual predators, threatening, violent, and likely to engage in criminal behavior and deserve to be homeless. That is due to a study that was done on American attitudes towards homelessness. At Chat Foundation, one of the things that we're really proud of is about 40% of our staff have either a current or former lived experience of homelessness. That's critical because it allows me to get to know the people that have experienced homelessness. It allows me to understand their story, understand what their childhood was like, what their background was like, why they were forced to drop out of school before completing high school, and how that had a cascading effect on their ability to remain housed. I get to talk to a lot of people, and what I would say is there are 100 ways to homelessness, but the number one story I hear is my wife and I were living in an apartment with our children. We were barely getting by, and then the letter came from the landlord saying that at the first of the year they were going to increase the rent $200 a month. We couldn't afford the rent increase because we were barely getting by. So we started looking for a new apartment and couldn't find anything any cheaper. That is the number one story. And so a lot of times we want to jump to making assumptions about people, but a lot of times it comes down to just simple economics. It's really difficult to make ends meet when there's not enough cash coming into the home. Now, back to Dr. Vitelli's comments, this also creates quite a stigma. One of the things that I've noticed in talking with people that we serve is they say that the first thing that they lose when they become homeless is a sense of dignity. And then the longer they're homeless, they become invisible. The people stop looking at them in the eye. They avoid them on the street. They aren't interested in learning their first name. And this stigma creates a sense of shame. What happens is we meet people that have resources that are eligible to them, and they don't even know that. Our case managers work with homeless individuals to try and rally as many resources towards these individuals to get them back on their feet. In fact, that's what our organization does. While we're in Chattanooga, actually stands for the Center for Homeless Advancement for Today and Tomorrow. We try and pull out all the stops to try and get resources and assistance to the people so they can live a life of self-sufficiency. And shame causes, or the stigma that's pervasive around homelessness, actually has a very profound effect in causing people to stop asking for help. They've heard no too many times. They are feeling like they're unworthy. They think that people are going to give them such a hard time and say no to them that they stop asking for help. If we can come alongside these people, if we can start treating homeless individuals like worthy individuals, like people that are worth a little investment, it goes a long way into changing their mindset, their attitudes, and how they feel about themselves. And so I think that's a really big thing. So here's one more statistic, that 60% of Americans think that people fall into homelessness for making bad choices. I'm going to ask you to make a subtle shift in our thinking. Maybe it's not that they were making bad choices, but maybe there's certain people that are amongst us that simply are not in a position where they have good choices to make. Let that sink in. We think it's by making bad choices, but some people don't have a list of 10 good choices to make. They only have 2 choices, and both of them really are going to come with negative consequences. So we really need to, when we're thinking about the homeless community, try and set some of these prejudices aside. So one more experiment. This one's kind of interesting. In 2014, the New York City Rescue Mission decided to do a social experiment. They took well-connected, successful, well-known people and dressed them up as homeless and then positioned them on benches, on the street, on the sidewalk throughout New York City. And they had arranged for people that were close to these people, family members, friends, colleagues, to walk down the street. They had a hidden camera to catch the reactions of the people walking down the street. And very consistently, people averted their eyes. They didn't want to look people in the face. They walked to the other side of the sidewalk to create as much distance. And at the end of the day, not a single individual that was dressed up to be homeless was recognized by people that knew them. That's stunning. It's almost as though the appearance of homelessness is so repulsive to us that we avoid them like we do a speed bump, that we just want to create distance. We don't want to make eye contact. That's very telling, I think, about how we experience homelessness. It matches a response from psychologist Susan Fisk that describes what's called a stereotype content model. We see those in certain classes, middle class, elderly, and wealthy, favorably, and it elicits feelings of warmth and gratitude and compassion. But Fisk says we found that homeless people elicited the lowest degrees of warmth. Another study did brain scans on people that would see images. And brain scans measure electronic activity in different areas of the brain. And when people viewed images of homeless individuals, areas of the hippocampus and the lower insula lit up like a Roman candle. And these are the same areas that light up when we see somebody vomiting. So there is this neurological component that we find homelessness, or the reality, I think it's really the reality of homelessness, to be so repulsive that we tend to avoid it. And so this has the impact of giving the people that are most vulnerable and most needing of assistance, it's kind of this barrier. And how do we get past that barrier? So I'm going to make some suggestions. The first suggestion is that we really need to get closer to the problem if we want to understand it and solve it. And that's going to make some people uncomfortable, okay? I'm going to give you a little story of a person that I'm going to call Angela. I didn't know Angela. Angela works now in our community center as a peer support specialist for people experiencing homelessness and in the process of getting rehoused. She had a very interesting story. She had been a behavioral support specialist with a local mental health organization in the area. She hadn't touched drugs or alcohol her whole life. She wasn't making a great wage, but she had her own apartment, was getting by. She experienced some personal challenges that caused her to start missing work. Eventually, she had to leave work because she couldn't continue working due to some of these struggles, and eventually found herself homeless. While she was homeless, she had been assaulted and raped numerous times and began to fear living in a tent. She began to fear sleeping. She felt so vulnerable that no one would protect her, no one would help her. And in her mind, the best solution to this was, well, every time I fall asleep, something terrible happens to me. So the solution is don't fall asleep, stay awake. So she tried caffeine, she tried nicotine, tried different things, eventually started using amphetamines, and this developed into a crystal meth addiction. This is somebody that had never had a drug or alcohol use history that is now taking methamphetamine because that is a better situation than falling asleep and being sexually assaulted. None of us should have to make those decisions. Those are not good decisions that we have to make. And that's what I mean. Some people say that homelessness is about making bad decisions. Sometimes you have no good decisions to make. Here's the good story. She got herself clean. And one day, she got a letter in the mail telling her that she had gotten a voucher, a housing voucher. She is now 8 years housed. She's 9 years clean. And she's now working in our facility, helping others move forward. Why do I tell you this story? 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of us don't think a lot about the reality of being homeless, but most of us live closer to that line of not making ends meet than we'd like to think about, and it could happen to any one of us. And yet we most of us haven't walked in those shoes. We haven't had those experiences. And so we're kind of limited in the understanding of this. But helping me hear Angela's story helps me understand some of the challenges and the best ways to help people. So there's this quote that I've really been drawn to in the last couple of years of my work. It's by Mother Teresa, and she says, "We can't help them because we can't love them. We can't love them because we don't know them." And I think that goes a long way. You know, our organization is blessed by having an army of volunteers that come in and serve meals, work in our clothing department, work in our community center. And these people have crossed over from the threshold of homelessness makes me uncomfortable to these are human beings. These are worthy individuals. I get to hear their stories. I get to know them. I get to find unique ways to help them. And I've learned so much about homelessness directly from the people who have experienced it. Most of the myths that I used to believe about homeless have been shattered by having interaction with people that are experiencing homelessness. It's been invaluable. And so what I'm going to suggest is that there's this learning process that we all go through, and it's based on building a basis of information. And so I'm just going to start with this premise that maybe some of the information we have about homelessness is factual and accurate, and yet some of it's not. And so John Locke, who was a French philosopher and the father of modern education, he had this idea that basically education was a construct where you build a foundation and then you start layering in new knowledge and new understanding, and it all sinks. And the more knowledge that we add, the wiser we become. But occasionally we come in contact with a new piece of information or a new piece of knowledge that doesn't fit that base. When that happens, what we have to do is go through this process of deconstructing. We have to be willing to challenge what we've thought or what we've believed when it just doesn't sync up. And that's what I think can really happen. If we spend time with the homeless, if we serve in a soup kitchen, in a homeless shelter, wherever, I think we're going to find that maybe some of the things that we believed, which then controlled what we think are solutions for homelessness, actually aren't accurate. I would love for everybody to correct this and be able to build a construct or an understanding of homelessness that allows us all to get on the same page, because I think that's what's going to need to happen for us to solve this problem. And one big thing we need to correct is what Michael J. Sandel calls the tyranny of merit. In our culture, broadly speaking, and this is based on English law and a lot of history, is that we adhere to the maxim that we get what we deserve. And there's this phrase, just desserts, that if we play by the rules, we do what's expected, we put our best effort forth, good things will happen. We'll have a good life, a nice home, and a lot of happiness. Under this framework, someone experiencing homelessness, it must be because of character flaws, right? They just didn't apply themselves. They got their just desserts. But let's be honest. Are everybody's background's the same? I grew up in a fairly intact family that they invested in me. They made sure I got my education. I still had to find my way, and it wasn't always smooth or easy. But I look back at my history and say my path from childhood to adulthood was fairly smooth. As a therapist and as somebody working in nonprofits for the last 20 years, I've met a lot of people that had really rough childhood, whether it was broken homes, whether it was violence, lack of education, poor choices, just terrible things happen. Not everybody's playing field is level. Our chance encounters. I think about the different mentors I've had in my life that really were inspirational in helping me move forward in life. I know not everybody has had that. And then we have biological challenges. We have some people that are really dealing with serious health issues that other people don't. And so what I'm saying is when we believe in the tyranny of the merit, that what we do means everything, then we ignore some of the challenges that other people have experienced. And that's not just fair. That's not fair. We don't have a level playing ground. And so isn't it okay to say, some people didn't get the help they needed when they're younger. Why can't I help them now? One more thing on character flaws and homelessness. I've been a therapist for a couple decades. I've sat in rooms with a lot of people and I got to know them intimately. And what I've observed is people that are living comfortable, maybe even affluent lives, some of them are lazy. Some of those are addicted to substances. Some of those have character flaws. These factors are really not drivers in homelessness. They may be factors in getting that person to become the best person they could be. They may be issues that we'd want to address once we got them housed and moving forward. I'm not saying we ignore these issues, but we really, as a society, need to get away from this idea that people are homeless because of mental illness and substance use, because statistically it's not there, and the inverse is incorrect, that there's lots of lazy, addicted, abusive people that are holding down jobs that have never experienced homelessness. And so those statistics just don't add up. I've also met some really amazing, very smart, very courageous homeless individuals. We have an outreach worker on our team that goes out into these remote encampments to provide support. And she told me one day, she said, I've met some of the most amazing people that all of their resources, all of their intellect, all of their talents are really being dedicated to simply surviving. And she sees really amazing things happen. Unfortunately, if you're spending all your talents and all your brain power and all your efforts trying to just survive, it limits how well you can live your life. So now maybe I've piqued your curiosity. Maybe you've gotten to a place where you've said, okay, I want to do more. Where do I go? All right. Just every town has a soup kitchen. Some towns have homeless shelters. I would even recommend starting at your local park bench. Once you get past that discomfort of being in close contact with the people struggling with homelessness, that's your first step. And then I think you'll find ways to support. Remember, we can't help them because we don't love them. We can't love them because we don't know them. So getting to know them is step one. We can't wait for anybody else to take care of the problem. It has to be us. And if we don't start, it's going to get worse. If you want to take a deeper dive on this topic, I have a resource for you. The book When We Walk By Donald Burns and Kevin Adler. It's an easy read. It's pretty informative. Covers some other topics too, but it's a good one, When We Walk By. And if you have any other questions, send me an email to info@chatfoundation.org. We'd love to get other topics flowing through our podcast or be able to answer some questions on future episodes. Thanks for listening to Give Me Shelter. If you made it this far in the episode, I invite you to share it with at least one person today, because change happens one conversation at a time. I'm Baron King. We'll see you next time.